Welcome back, everyone. I hope you feel refreshed, had a cup of coffee, tea, had a walk, and it's good to see you all back here for part two, which I think is going to be a very exciting part of our two-day conference. And that's a panel discussion addressing the question of change and growth in shared living. And to help us address this question, how do you grow shared living? We've got a fantastic panel that I'm about to introduce, and people who have genuine experience in growing organizations, growing successful initiatives, but also being part of successful initiatives and have really important insights to offer there. So I'm really looking forward to this. I'll now go about introducing the speakers, and then I'll ask them to say a few words, and we'll get into the discussion. So we've got on the panel today Josh McAllister, who is a former teacher and the founder and then the first chief executive of Frontline, which is now a national leadership program in children's social care and is really part of the landscape now of supporting improvements to children's social care. And more recently, he was the chair of the Independent Review of Children's Social Care, a really important piece of work that is already leading to changes in the sector, I think positive changes. So that's Josh. Alex Smith is also with us today. Alex Smith is the founder and chief executive of the Cares Family. It's a set of charities within an umbrella that tries to build intergenerational connections to reduce loneliness. And he's part of an organization that is pledging to really bring more people, particularly older and younger people, together to reduce loneliness, boost friendship, and just create better communities to live in. He's also an Obama Fellow, which is amazing. So hopefully he can touch on that as well when we speak to him. We've also got Steph Downey here, who is been a social worker in adult social care for 20 years, is now the service director in Gateshead. If you've been to Gateshead, they have an impressive range of activities trying to tackle poverty. And Steph is really involved in that, a true believer in asset-based community approaches to improving people's lives. So it's great to have Steph here as well. And we also have two ambassadors. So we have a group of ambassadors that work with Shared Lives Plus, and their role is to give voice and amplify the views and opinions of people who draw on various forms of shared living. We've got Tom Milnes here, who lives with his Shared Lives carer, Joe, and after a period of mental health, now lives with two other people, and has got great experiences to talk about in relation to being part of that. So it's great to have Tom here. And Emma Parish Andrews, who, no one be jealous here, is sitting in Lanzarote at the moment. We did ask if she could put the background of the beach behind her, but unfortunately she can't. But she's joining us from Spain and is a home share ambassador and has been involved. I mentioned her earlier in my speech. She's been involved in 4 different home share arrangements and is a real advocate of that way of living. So great to have this fantastic panel. I'm going to stop talking now and just set the next task, really, which is I'd like each speaker to speak for around 4 minutes and address that question of how do you grow an initiative? How do you grow something that really makes a difference? You know, what are the barriers? How do you best overcome those barriers, and what lessons are there for people involved in shared lives? So I'm going to start, just go through the order as it comes. So Josh, if you could go first, that'd be brilliant.
Thanks, Ewan, and great to be here. I was lucky enough to listen in to the earlier sessions before joining this. So fantastic to hear people's stories and some incredible human beings involved in shared lives. So a real pleasure to be here. I've tried to sort of reflect on the questions that Ewan's given me, thinking particularly about shared lives and the bigger role that community can play in care. And I guess the biggest barriers that I've seen through doing the review of children's social care, which has got a different but related set of issues, is first of all around the mindset. I think sometimes the way in which we look at risk is a big barrier to how we help community step forward and wider family networks to step forward to love and care for children. And sometimes we think about risk from harm and the need for safeguarding and to keep a child safe, but that can leave them growing up in a care system that leaves them lonely, which creates all kinds of other danger later on in life. And we don't have a rounded enough view of what risk means. And it needs to take much greater account of the lifelong impacts of poor relational health, being isolated, being lonely, not having a good sense of who you are in relation to the world, because you don't have those people around you who are saying, I'm here, I'm always going to be here, I love you, I've got you. So there's a mindset barrier, particularly about risk. And then the other big barrier, I think, is about the legacy public services that we've got in the UK, which is a series of quite complicated public services that we've built up over time. And we're always trying to bring those legacy systems together to take responsibility for the stuff between health and education and children's social care that really matters, that really nobody's responsible for. So connection, dignity, love, these are really important things to have in order to live a good life. And yet the legacy of public services that we've got don't have responsibility for those outcomes. So those are two pretty big barriers that we're trying to find our way through and struggling a lot of the time. I think the things that could facilitate change, these are sort of quite system level techie things, but I think they're important. One is we need to change the rules of the system. What we measure, what we inspect, what we think of as good performance tend to default into the things that are predictable, linear, and controllable. But the things we're talking about are organic and messy and intimate. And how we kind of get measurement and performance to think about those things in a way that properly reflects them being done well is going to be a really important part of enabling the sorts of work we're all talking about here to flourish. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to make space for communities and community-led initiatives. I think sometimes services unintentionally try to replace or displace the role of family and community. I just give you a small example, which is that at the moment, when a grandparent wants to come forward and care for a child who might otherwise go into care because they love their grandchild and they want to look after them and keep them safe and keep them in the family network, we've got a children's social care system that, in order to financially support that, makes them become a foster carer. And for them to become a foster carer, they need to be trained. They might need to do a daily log on that grandchild. They might need to have all the sorts of infrastructure around foster care come down and bear on their family life. And they're the grandparent. They don't need any of that. They love that kid. And we can back them and back them as the grandparent, not as a foster carer. So there are some real examples where the state tries to do the right thing, but it's actually displacing and pushing away those who are trying to step forward and do what human beings do at their best, which is, form strong tribes. So changing the rules of the system and making space for the community and family, I think, are crucial. And then just really briefly on the sort of lessons from my own experience of the review in particular, rather than, I guess, less talking about frontline, is that we already have a system of children's social care where hundreds of thousands of people are doing this stuff already. There is a hidden system of kinship carers, aunts and uncles, grandparents, family, friends, and really the system needs to adopt a mindset which says our job is not to provide a relationship as a service, but to run the service to help flourish and strengthen those lifelong loving relationships. And that's what I love about Shared Lives. I think it's why Family by Family is such a promising example of work in the children's social care space. And it gives me hope that, these ideas that we don't really talk about enough, about connection, about love, about dignity, that we can build services based on those objectives, which is, I think, what a lot of this comes down to. So pleasure to be here, and I hope that's within my 4-minute capped time, Ewan.
Spot on. Thank you, Josh. That was really helpful. Great start. So Alex, can I come to you next?
Thanks, Ewan. Thanks for having me. I was really humbled and inspired by some of the stories that I heard this morning in the first session. Thank you to Catherine, Richard, Josh, Paul, Helen, Lynn, Ian, Chris, Dennis for sharing them. Really quite inspiring. So thank you. One of Josh just finished on kind of some concepts and language there that I think are absolutely fundamental. And at the Cares family, which, as Ewan says, brings older and younger people together, but also brings people together across the different intersections within those two generations. So whether that's class differences, religious or ethnic differences, attitudinal differences, the 5 key values that we hold closest and are our stated values as an organization are bravery, learning, kindness, community, and trust. And Catherine mentioned earlier the words home, love, and community. Lynn used the word empathy. Josh has just used the words kinship and dignity. And I think I'll start just by saying that none of those, concepts are woolly. None of them are the extra mile required to build a society. They're the first steps required to build a kind of functioning and loving society. And yet our culture in this country and in some other countries around the world doesn't make enough space for those things that really not only make life worth living but make life livable. And one of the stats that I'm most struck by always in the work of the Cares family and in this work of sharing lives in general is that 72% of adults in the UK believe that knowing their neighbours is of fundamental importance to individual and collective well-being, but 73% of adults in the UK don't know their neighbours themselves. And so our culture, we're doing this crazily British thing of recognising and valuing something in community, but not doing anything like enough to nurture it or to care for it. And I think that culture extends to a kind of feeling of a lack of trust in big systems, but also that people in communities hold, but also a lack of trust in community that people in big systems can sometimes hold. And that dichotomy is a real challenge and a barrier to the growth of this type of work. We also don't trust one another enough as neighbours. It's hard to get involved in community projects, whether formally or informally. There are so many bureaucracies and barriers that we put up in front of ourselves that aren't necessary. But we also don't trust or value enough in our culture the wonderful people who are doing this type of work. So I'm making a point about British culture here. I'll talk about leadership in a second and then stories after that. Fundamentally, I think one of the things that we all have to do, and it's already been mentioned, is to campaign ruthlessly and hard on those soft terms of love, dignity, community, and home, and see them and share them for what they are, which is kind of absolutely integral to everything that we are. On the point about leadership, and Catherine mentioned leadership in her kind of opening words earlier on, of course, we need more diverse leaders who are running organisations. And of course, we need more people who have come up through the care sector themselves. We also, I think, need ambitious and bold leadership programmes to support some of those people into those positions of authority and power, because otherwise we're going to be stuck with these legacy systems in perpetuity. So I think more programmes to make sure that the leadership that's capable of changing some of those cultures is in a strong place is all absolutely fundamental. And I just kind of end on 2 points, really. Again, about kind of culture, leadership and stories. I think it was Paul earlier who said, I really despise social work. I mean, that is a really problematic position to be in, where people who are experiencing it feel so strongly that it's not benefiting them necessarily. And that's something that should give us such stark warning that it is a bigger risk to keep doing what we're doing now than it is to try something new. And the final point I would make, and this really came through to me when Helen and Paul were talking, and somebody mentioned how strong their relationship clearly was. this is all about relationships. It's about relationships in local authorities, in the social care sector as a whole, but it's also about trying to engender and trust in relationships in communities where people really experience them. So that is, I'd say, the three big things: culture, leadership, and stories. But all of those things, culture change, investment in leadership, and investment in stories, all depend on meaningful, strong, and collaborative relationships.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. That's really brilliant. So, Steph, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay.
Thank you, Ewan, and like everybody else, I'm really delighted to be here. My challenge is, having listened to Alex and Josh, I've now got more ideas I want to talk about, so I'm going to try and curtail myself to the 4 minutes. So here in Gateshead, we're really proud of the shared lives service that we run, with around about 100 people accessing the service at this point in time. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've done there and some of the positives, but also some of the challenges that our growth in shared lives have created for us. But I really wanted to start with the visibility. I think that's come out really loud and clear, and like other panelists, I would agree we really need to build on the stories, the narratives from people who are providing shared lives support and the people living in shared lives arrangements. Because, you know, if we think about children's social care, foster caring is well understood in the public. People have a concept of foster caring, and yet we still struggle to recruit foster carers. Shared lives, unfortunately, I think, like a lot of adult social care, is quite invisible to the public. A lot of people don't know about adult social care until they need to access our support at some point in their life. So really something about public understanding and how we celebrate the success and those really strong narrative stories, which for me are far more important than strategies and policies and things like that. It's how we sell those stories to people. In Gateshead, one of the things we've done is invest to save. So a number of people have commented about, you know, the problems that we have in the social care workforce, funding in local authorities, the sort of the budget cuts and the savings we've had to make. But for us, actually, shared lives gives us better outcomes for our service users at less cost. So there's a really, really strong narrative there for us about doing the right thing, but actually seeing better outcomes and saving money at the same time. And it also helps us in terms of employing people in Gateshead, so ensuring that our public sector money stays in Gateshead and is spent as part of our wider economy, rather than perhaps going into you know, the pockets of companies that are based offshore or in other parts of the UK. So it's a really key part for us of our strengths-based approach in Gateshead, and one of the models, as I say, that we've invested in deliberately to try and grow it. So whilst we've got 100 people at the minute, I'm really pleased to say we've got about 5 or 6 people waiting for shared lives carers, and about 6 shared lives carers coming through the system at this point in time as part of that investment. And my colleagues in the team tell me that, as well as the, you know, additional capacity, it's been some of the project management support, the comms support, the campaigns, the marketing, etc., that have been really crucial for us in attracting new people in. I really was, I was very upset, obviously, about some of the comments that people said about social workers, and take those on board. I think, you know, whilst we're nowhere near perfect in Gateshead, one of the positives is that I manage the social work teams and I manage our provider services. So the colleagues who are managing, you know, our teams who might be identifying shared lives as an opportunity for somebody, or are sitting in the same management meetings with the people who manage the shared lives service. So we've been able to really bring those teams together, and that investment that I talked about, we did that jointly with the assessment teams and the shared lives team, so that everybody was on board and understood the rationale around that. I mentioned at the outset that one of our areas of success has also created a challenge for us. So we've got a really vibrant Our Lives service in Gateshead, which is a day service shared lives model. And it's really, really positives. You know, we've got people accessing brilliant opportunities throughout the week as a result. However, what we've tended to find is that we've lost a lot of our shared lives carers to that model, because they find it more flexible and equally rewarding for them. So that's something that we're grappling with in terms of how do we maintain the positivity of Our Lives, but also continue to recruit people in to the shared lives traditional, you know, model of people living in the home with a shared lives carer. In terms of the workforce issues, I think, we've got an opportunity. So colleagues who work with me will always say I'm a real optimist. So in the face of stuff that's really challenging and difficult for us, we're seeing a massive change to the economic sort of workforce across the country as a result of the pandemic and various other factors. And I was just looking at some stats before I came on to the conference this morning. So, it's recognised that there's about 1.1 million people have left the workforce since the pandemic started, and that we've seen the biggest reduction in workforce in the 3 months leading up to August. But I think that provides a real opportunity for us with Shared Lives. People have reevaluated their working arrangements, how they want to earn money, what's important to them as a result of the pandemic. We've got people who've left the workforce perhaps much earlier than they would have planned to. And I think that gives us an opportunity as those people are reevaluating their lives to think, is there an opportunity there for them to come into Shared Lives and to get really good outcomes and have a very different career perhaps towards the end of their working life.
Thank you, Steph. All on time so far. Amazing. Thank you very much. Again, another inspiring contribution. And this idea that there's this one, well, not idea, it's a statistic of 1.4 million coming into, potentially interested in new kinds of jobs is really quite an interesting idea to think about. Thank you. Emma, I think we're going to come to you last, but not least. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Emma. I've been doing home share now since 2019. Started off first of all with my daughter because she didn't settle in very well to university. So then she went into, found out about home share, and she went in and she absolutely thrived. She thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I've done it as well. I've been into 4 different home shares with each person having different needs and help. But it's been so rewarding for me. I find the greatest barriers to growth is people not knowing about home share. When I actually talk about home share, people don't understand it. They don't understand the concept or the core principle of it. So I think that is a real barrier, because if they don't understand it and how it works, then we can't get it to grow. They need to realise that it's a benefit not just for the homeowner or for myself, but for both of us. It's it's a 50-50. It's a win-win for all involved. We need, there's no advertising about it, which needs to raise awareness on a national level. Those are the greatest barriers that I've found when I've been chatting about it and talking to people and meeting people, is the fact that they just don't know it, they don't understand it, and they don't know how it works. They need to explain how it is for home share. A lot of people say, oh, sharing a flat, is that all it is? And it's like, no, it's so much more than that. You win so much, you gain so much, and so does the homeowner. They're not lonely. They've got you as companionship. It's just a fantastic experience, and I absolutely love doing it. I think to help facilitate growth for it, we need to do better advertising. It needs to be heard more. We need to have targeted advertising and campaigns in areas where there's especially high concentration of older people, especially living alone, who maybe have lost their partners, their families, unsure how to help them, the support to give them, and having a home sharer in their house, giving them companionship, whether it be cooking, gardening, sitting, watching the telly, just generally having a chat, going out for lunch. It all means so much to that person, knowing that they're not in that house on their own, and especially overnight. I think a good thing to help facilitate growth is to spread the word in areas where it's really important, where the older people go. So especially in GP surgeries, when I've gone to take the clients to the doctor's surgery for appointments or the hospitals, they don't know who I am and what I work for and what I do. And when I explain it to them, they're amazed and they're like, wow, how do we not know about this? I've got so many clients, patients that this could really work for. So those are main key areas, I think, especially for GPs, they would really like to know. You have a lot of older people sometimes going to see their GPs quite regularly with small ailments, but it's mainly for companionship. They're lonely and it's someone else for them to talk to. They know the doctor's going to be there and help them. Community centres, hospitals, where they hang about, there needs to be lots of information for them so that they can understand that there is this help. We could have advice in their mags, and online more so would probably help for the families. Sometimes families get very desperate. They know their older person needs help. They just don't know what to do. Older people want to stay in their own homes. They're happy, secure. That's where they want to be. They don't want to be a burden on the system, on society. They want to live in their own home and enjoy their own home. And home share enables them to do that. They can continue living in their own homes. They continue be surrounded by their friends and their families, and we're in their local areas where they're happy. You know, it's a great thing. It's a magical thing. And I think the lessons that I've learned to support the growth is, of course, the homeowners being able to stay in their own homes. My very first home share that I did with my daughter was a lovely lady called Barbara, who had fallen over various times, had heart issues. And she was actually in a care home at the time, and then her daughter found out about home share. So Barbara was able to come out of the care home, where she was very distressed, very frightened, unsure. She did not want to be in there. She wanted to be in her own home. And so she came home, and myself and my daughter helped look after her. We'd go out, we'd go out ice creams to the park, we'd sit and watch telly and chat. And it was just a fantastic experience. And she was able to die at home in her own home, which was her final wish. And she was unable to do that. The lessons also is relieving burdens on the hospital and the care homes, because if the homeowner can stay in their own home, that relieves the burden, and they don't want to be a burden. You know, that's what they always say. I'm fine, I'm all right, you know, don't worry about me. You know, and inside they are worried, they are scared, they are frightened of what the future holds for them, how they are going to spend out their last days. Can they stay in their own home where they know everybody, where their neighbours are? Another lady that I looked after had Parkinson's.
Emma, sorry, we're going to have to move on at some fairly soon, if that's okay. Sorry about that.
And that's just the lessons that I've learned for support the growth of shared lives.
Brilliant. Fantastic contributions. In fact, we're only a few minutes over time, which is quite incredible given we've had 5 people contribute. So thank you very much. If I were writing a guide on how to grow brilliant, caring, relationship-based organizations, I could write it based on these 5 conversations, to be quite honest. So, I mean, really practical, really thoughtful, brilliant insights. There are going to be questions coming in from the audience, but I just thought I'd kick off. I mean, kick off with this question. It seems that one of the biggest challenges that we have is that no one or not enough people know about these good things that are happening, whether it be home share or shared lives. And I was reflecting on the news yesterday. I mean, sometimes it can be so incredibly negative and depressing that you don't want to go anywhere near social care, to be honest. That would be my view. If I was one of those people looking for a new opportunity, I wouldn't want to go there. How do we create a positive national campaign? How do we all join up and share the good news and get people aware of these opportunities? How can we increase public awareness? Anyone want to come in on that funny, difficult question?
I'm not good with silence, Ewan, so I'll jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, silence. Thank you for speaking.
I mean, obviously, we've done work regionally with Shared Lives Plus, as you know, and I think there's a real benefit in coming together as a larger group. So, we've talked about the pressures in council budgets and the challenges that we all face. So there's definitely something about everybody coming together, sharing ideas, having a campaign that's regional. So, I live in Gateshead. I don't live in Gateshead. I work in Gateshead, but I live in Newcastle. The people who are providing shared life services move around a region. We're not all just static in the same place. So there's definitely something for me about a kind of a regional campaign and how that can help to really, bring the sort of the idea of shared lives into the public consciousness. I think there's a bigger question, which I'll pose and then not answer, which is just about social care in general. As I say, you know, the majority of people don't know about social care until they need it, and that's something I've grappled with in all my careers as a social years in social work. How do we get social care and the people, the brilliant people who work in social care, into the kind of the minds and consciousness of the public, the way that people think about doctors, nurses, teachers, police officers, etc. So don't have an answer to that one, but that's something we're certainly keen to work with others on.
Thank you, Steph. So Josh first, and then Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's all about the interest from the public in doing this. It's more, I think, about how services respond to that interest. So last year we had 160,000 people in England express an interest in becoming a foster carer, and we approved only 2,000 of them, which is a pretty staggering figure.
Wow.
We had 200,000 people come forward under the Homes for Ukraine programme. So I think there's some really heartening signs that the British public want to do this. The appetite is there, they see the benefit of it. But it's when human beings express an interest in doing it and then come into contact with the state and how the state responds to that interest. That's the problem. So we can run big campaigns and get more people interested, but until we change our mindset about how we create the space for members of the public to do some of this work, which I think we're all agreeing is the right approach, we'll keep raising expectation that won't get met. So I think it's really as much about how the state responds to that interest from the public as it is really about whether the interest is there in the first place.
Yeah, that's very thought-provoking. Thank you. Alex, do you want to come in on that?
I mean, Josh has just made the challenge even harder by pointing out a reality. And you could add the example of when people signed up to volunteer with the NHS during the pandemic, and most of them then weren't able to actually get involved. That's a really big challenge, how you pressure the government into having the right resources, capacity, funding to be able to mobilize something that clearly is latent in society. I'll just say a couple of things. One is that the Cares family and I have been involved in a campaign called We're Right Here in the last 12 months, which is trying to push government towards a Community Power Act and investing in community power in general, so that people in communities have more freedom and agency to be able to work together on issues and barriers that are relevant to them locally. And it was the combination of, the idea of this campaign had been in gestation for 2 or 3 years before that. It was the combination of a small group of people at the tops of a kind of multitude of organizations saying, we really just need to take the risk and bite the bullet and do this now. We can't wait any longer. We don't know that this is going to be perfect. We can't spend the next 3 years in committee discussing what our terms and conditions and terms of agreement and SLA is going to look like. We just have to start. And that was very much my mentality as well when starting the Cares family, and it has been successful. The government has engaged so far very well. There's more work to do, obviously. Political parties are engaging with the campaign. So I think the notion of drawing down money from a foundation, for example, just to start a campaign, a public awareness campaign, is part of the picture, notwithstanding the point that Josh made. The other brief thing that I would say is that government does need to act, but government will only act when there has been some level of that culture change that I was talking about before. Politics and government often catches up with what's already gone on in society, and culture changes that have already occurred in society. They don't often drive those culture changes. And to give you an illustration of this, I think I was stood at a urinal in Chicago at a basketball match once and looked up, and there was a poster advertising the trucking profession, because different companies and the US infrastructure as a whole needed more people to get involved in truckers. And then the urinal next to me had plumbers. And that celebration of, working class jobs that pay well enough, and there's an issue there as well, but celebrating them, inviting people into them, and telling the story of people who do those jobs and create dignity and value for their communities and their families, and appreciate and are satisfied in those jobs. I think is part of that culture change picture, and the government won't fully act until civil society does something to put huge amounts of pressure on it to shift that culture.
Thank you. Tom or Emma, do you want to come in on, because you've got great stories to tell. How would you encourage both the state, the government side of things, and the public to get involved in this kind of work? Any ideas?
Well, there definitely needs to be obviously more advertising. It needs to be known, because everybody that I talk to don't understand or have never heard it. And when I talk to them and explain to them about it, sometimes it's a relief for the family that actually there is another option. They don't have to put their parents into a care home and into the system that they know is already under strain and burden, and there is help for them, and allowing their family member to stay in their own home. So spreading the word will make a big difference. There are people that are crying out for the help. They want to help their parents. They want them to stay at home. They want to do the best that they can. And the homeowner themselves is the same. So the amount of people that I've spoke to that then know about it and then make that connection and contact, Age UK and start the ball rolled in the area itself here in Gloucestershire, when my daughter was the first one for Gloucestershire. So now if you go on the list, that list of homeowners looking for home sharers is growing and growing all the time, because once they're finding out about it, they're realizing that this is a really good scheme. This could help. So it is, people want to do it, and they want to be able to have that facility to be able to help their parents. So if they know about it, then they can do it. If they don't know about it, how will they do it? And doing it on a big national level, maybe it is something for the government to step and help in. Social care is a big issue for them. But especially on the ground level, where I am, where I see it, the biggest barrier is people not knowing about it. So if they don't know about it, they can't use it.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Steph, you hate silences, so there's actually a question for you specifically, but I think others can comment on this. It's a classic thorny issue of transitions, or when a younger person becomes an adult. How is so much potential to see children, young people move through into shared lives, and I just don't think it happens as much as it should. How do you tackle that? Help tackle that issue in Gateshead?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pleased to say the largest number of shared lives carers that we have in Gateshead outside of our live service is actually through the foster route. So these are people who've been foster carers and have then transferred over to being shared lives carers. So that's brilliant. We still want to recruit new people in as shared lives carers, so I would hasten to add. One of the things I do outside of Gateshead is I chair our social work teaching partnership in the North East region. So transitions is an area that comes up quite often, because it's the interface between adults and children's social care. So I know there are lots of different models, even just within the North East in terms of transition support. But for me, the really important thing is about moving into children's services and helping young people come into adulthood. It's known from the point of birth that young person is going to be an adult. We know from that point when the day they'll turn 18. So we start planning early in Gateshead. We think about, employment and education and all of the opportunities that we want for our young people, and that real sort of reach into the Children's with Disabilities team to support young people in that transition into adulthood. We have a dedicated transitions team, which I think does help in terms of maintaining continuity. I know there's been questions asked as well about continuity of social workers and the changes in social workers. We all struggle with that, and in another conference I could talk to you about all the work we're doing on social work training. But I think having that dedicated transitions function for us certainly helps in Gateshead in terms of that pre-planning and doing all of that really important work. And as I say, I have confidence that certainly works well in our shared lives service.
Brilliant. Thank you. Josh, do you have any reflections on that classic cliff edge, and how you avoid people falling off the edge and not ending up in good support?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one, because we we think the way the system works is that children hit 18 and then because they've been in care, they somehow don't go back and get in touch with their family. But very often what happens is they hit 18, they've been told they can't see relatives, they can't see siblings, and then they go straight back to families at 18, which is what most of us would probably do. And so the care system too often doesn't prepare young people for handling the relationships that they're going to voluntarily have when they've got agency as an adult. And some of that's about what home they're living in, so what are the care arrangements, but it's more importantly about the relationships that they've got and how they navigate those. And the care system's pretty bad at times at supporting that. So reunification work, which reunification is the biggest route out of care. More children leave foster care to go back to live with their families than to go into a residential children's home, for example. And we just don't know anything really about effective reunification practice. So it's not research, it's not understood. And some of this comes back to an earlier point I made about, what do we measure? What are the rules of the system? And one of the things that the review has recommended is that we have a mission that the care system ensures that when someone's hit 18 and is leaving the care system, that they've got at least 2 lifelong loving relationships in their life that have been identified. Now, that's been quite a challenging message for the system because it says, well, how on earth do we measure loving relationships? And I think even holding that question is a great provocation to the system to think differently. Because if you've had somebody in your care who's lived in a foster home and then actually the foster carer is saying you move out at 18, well, that's not a lifelong loving relationship. If we put in place a PA or an independent visitor or a mentor, that can be great and that can become a lifelong loving relationship. But if it's someone who's paid, it can end up feeling like a service, not like you've got someone who's going to be your family. Where do you go at Christmas? Who's going to be there on your birthday? If you get married, who's going to walk down the aisle with you? And that's the sort of fundamental right that the care system should be meeting, which is everybody grows up with a tribe and leaves the care system with a tribe of their own, that they're not then dependent on the state, reliant on the state to do things for them, which will never feel dignified or responsive or attuned to what they need. So I think there's some sort of practical stuff about where do young people who hit 18 live, but there's some deeper stuff about what does success when leaving the care system look like.
Thank you, Josh. That's really good. So actually, Alex, there's a question about intergenerational living, and I think there's been some criticism, I think, leveled at Britain at not being as strongly supportive of intergenerational life as maybe other countries. I don't know if that's your experience, but why do you think we have a bit of a barrier compared to maybe other places about getting together with different generations?
Well, it's a combination, I think, of market forces. We have a very individualistic culture, a very capitalistic culture, huge transience, single occupancy living. So that moves on to kind of cultural forces. Those cultural forces are social filter bubbles. We hang out with too many people who are like us. That's celebrated amongst younger people and also online. It's about bureaucratic forces like the health and safety and kind of technocratic regulations that we've had for the last 20 or 30 years. Safeguarding can be too onerous, and so it stifles risk-taking. But I think what I really remember, and one of the things that inspired me to try and navigate some of those potential barriers in setting up the Cares family, was that my grandmother in her late 70s, after she'd had a stroke, eventually had to go into a kind of classic residential nursing home, a care home. And it was kind of one of those places where the TV was blaring at full volume all day. People sat next to one another in armchairs without really having relationships. There weren't any games or kind of interactive activities put on for the people who were in there. This is, like 25 years ago or something. And there was a sign above my grandma's chair that said, "Get your own back on your kids, live as long as you can." And it was like, in the context of reading that sign in that room, which was so bleak, it kind of struck me as this really dark British sense of humour that was an example of how wrong that type of home and system of care was, certainly for my grandmother. And that's why I keep on coming back to culture change. I think, it's not every country in the world that has rampant economic systems that beat people down, right? And, underpay, where we don't respect and value the types of work and care professions, as I spoke about before. And that individualistic culture is a kind of Northern European Anglo-Saxon thing and this comes back to culture change and storytelling, as I was talking about before. I think we could all do a good job of researching and telling stories about places in Latin America, all over the world, East Asia, South Asia, Southern Europe, even, closer to home, where they don't have the same culture of intergenerational separation. We're one of the most age segregated places in the world when it comes to housing, when it comes to people spending time with one another. And yet again, there is that latent desire for younger and older people to share more time, but people just feel that there's something gets in the way. So I think if we can remove some of those barriers and have kind of slow burning campaign, but with an urgency towards culture change, then we can start to make some progress.
Thank you. So just wanted to come back on a question on I think Josh raised earlier about risk, and I think others have touched on that as well. So I was in a conversation with person in NHS Trust who's concerned that, and this is their words, the people carers couldn't handle some of the cases that we've got, and I don't particularly like the word case, but the people that we've got, they couldn't handle, and it's a sort of, you could see that they were thinking, we're just not going to go with this because it's just too risky for us. But it felt like, I've heard other stories today that shows that's probably not risky, and this could be done. I just wonder, how do you build a culture in public sector organisations that tries to get around this sort of fear of risk? Anyone got any insights on that? Josh, I don't know if you would come in on that, and also Tom.
Yeah. So to be really brief, I think it's about what we count risk as, and is it the short term safety of a child in a home that year, or is it the lifelong impact of the decisions we're making about who that child grows up with? Because once you start factoring in those longer term impacts, and there's some really good census level data on long-term lifelong impacts of different forms of care, kinship care through to residential care, and the evidence is incredibly strong that isolated institutional care is associated with very poor lifelong outcomes. Kinship care, being connected with a family network where that's safe, where that's the right answer, and it won't be for everybody, has got much better evidence. So that evidence needs to find its way into the decision-making process. And at the moment in the children's social care system, nationally, the system is pretty agnostic about whether a child's in a foster home or a kinship home or a residential care home. And I don't think we should be agnostic about it. I think there should be some value judgments that we lay on top of those decisions based on evidence, but they are about principles. And, how do we think children grow up well together? And so that starts to change the risk calculation. And I know there's some other questions about kinship there as well. And how you make.
Do you want to pick that one up, and then I'll go to Tom? Yeah,
so super brief on this. It's a great question. That England is. I mean, Alex has talked about kind of how we're an outlier in intergenerational living. We're a massive outlier internationally, England, in how we support kinship arrangements for raising children who might otherwise be in care. And some of that's about the law, and it makes it quite difficult for social workers and local authorities to put money around a set of relatives instead of using care, without it then becoming care itself, which is the thing you're trying to avoid. So there's a legal barrier, but if we can overcome that, we can then have conversations with family networks which says, look, this 4-month-old baby, we're looking at care, and that's going to cost us as a society £70,000-80,000 a year for 18 years. Could we use half of that money or a third of that money to think differently about how you as a family network could keep this child safe and love them? And we don't ask that question. We just don't ask that question. That's the crazy thing. So now that question won't lead to every answer being kinship care. But if we've got the means to ask the question and then to follow through on a plan, if it's the right plan, then it can really work. And if we were really worried about kinship arrangements, we wouldn't have such high levels of reunification out of care. So there are lots of warning signs in the system, including from stories of children who've been in care who've said, I don't know why people didn't let me live with my aunt. There's lots of warning signs which are telling us we're not doing enough on helping family networks find their own solution through this. So it won't be right for everybody. It does need some oversight, but the fundamental truth is we're not doing enough of it. And England's the odd one out, not everybody else.
Thank you, Josh. We're almost out of time, and that was I certainly loved that debate. I think we've had a really good discussion. There's lots of ideas I'm certainly going to take away from this, and hopefully others will as well. So I'm just going to wrap it up here, I think, and let you guys go for your lunch. So I just want to thank the speakers, the panelists, for coming along today and giving up their time to be involved. It's been really rewarding. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, and I hope we all work with you in the future, and I hope you're all successful. So thank you very much. I think we're having lunch now, so I'll see you later.